Muammar Gaddafi of Libya started propagating his vision of a unified Africa in the late 1990s. His ideas inspired leaders across Africa, eventually forming the African Union. The Organization of African Unity, or OAU, a global organization made up of almost all African states, was failing to produce significant results by the 1990s. The OAU had been working to achieve political and economic integration among its members, but progress was sluggish. Plans to reform the OAU did not start to take shape until 1998, when Muammar Gaddafi emerged as its leader. His initiative successfully re-established African unity as a top priority. Gaddafi is renowned for being a contentious individual. His reputation has been tarnished by his alleged involvement in the bombing of airplanes and buildings, as well as his support for groups that many nations consider to be terrorist organizations. It is frequently forgotten that Gaddafi was also a visionary leader capable of uniting powerful individuals behind his goals. He stood with underrepresented nations and peoples and disobeyed the major powers of the world. He was well liked as a leader among many, and in Africa in particular. Who was Muammar Gaddafi? Muammar Gaddafi was a military leader and politician who served as Libya's de facto head of state from 1969 to 2011. Colonel Gaddafi seized power in a 1969 military coup. After overthrowing the monarchy, he declared the establishment of a Libyan Arab Republic modeled after his own revolutionary ideals. With the help of Libya's substantial oil reserves, Gaddafi established a welfare state and turned Libya into the richest country in Africa. To this day, many Libyans look back on the period of Gaddafi's reign positively. Internationally, Gaddafi was widely considered to be a hard-mouthed contrarian who defied the established world order. As a result, few countries supported Gaddafi when protests against his rule started in 2011. In February 2011, in the context of the Arab Spring, people in Libya's eastern province of Cyrenaica took to the streets. People throughout the country revolted when the security forces in Libya were unable to put an end to the demonstrations. In the months that followed, government forces began to reclaim rebel-held territory. Reports of mass civilian casualties began to spread, prompting the United Nations, UN, to convene a meeting. After voting on whether to intervene, the UN authorized all necessary measures to protect civilians and civilian-populated areas. An alliance led by NATO intervened in Libya after receiving approval, and Gaddafi's forces were quickly routed. When Gaddafi attempted to flee the country, his military convoy was stopped by rebels, which led to the Libyan leader's demise. Gaddafi's break with the Arab world. Gaddafi embraced pan-Arabism, an ideology that sought to unite the Arab countries of the Middle East and North Africa into a single political entity from the start of his rule in 1969. Gaddafi gave up on the cause of Arab unity in 1998 after decades of work on it. The reason was a perceived lack of unity-related progress and a lack of Arab countries' political support for Libya, which at the time was subject to international sanctions. Libya had lost its influence on the world stage in the 1980s and 1990s due to its development of chemical and nuclear weapons, its ties to organizations that were viewed as terrorist by many Western countries, such as the Irish Republican Army and the Palestine Liberation Organization, as well as its participation in the bombing of European aircraft and structures. The United Nations imposed sanctions on Libya in 1992 as a result of Libya's involvement in the bombing of the plane that crashed over the Scottish town of Lockerbie in 1988. An air embargo was implemented as well as trade restrictions as part of these punitive actions. Few nations defied the sanctions and stood by Libya. The lack of support from Arab countries, in particular, was striking. Gaddafi felt betrayed because he had invested a lot of time and money in the Arab cause. Gaddafi needed a new source of support for his foreign policy because the Arab countries had let him down. He discovered allies among the nations of Africa, who demonstrated a willingness to disregard international embargoes and support a beleaguered Libya. Africa stands with Gaddafi and defies UN sanctions. African leaders unanimously decided to reject the UN sanctions imposed on Libya on June 8, 1998, at the 34th Annual Summit of the Organization of African Unity in Burkina Faso. The leaders of Mali, Niger, Burkina Faso, Chad, and Gambia all chose to travel to Libya during the ensuing months despite the air embargo. "The Arab world is finished," Gaddafi declared, adding that Africans and not Arabs are Libya's real supporters. This was his response when, in September 1998, at an Arab League meeting in Cairo, Arab leaders decided not to follow the OAU in defying the sanctions. 1998 marked a turning point for Gaddafi. He gave up on the Arab cause and started working hard to achieve African unification. Gaddafi had previously worked to enhance ties with African nations. He had dispatched diplomatic missions from Libya to mediate disputes between Ethiopia and Eritrea, the Sudanese government, and armed opposition groups, as well as peacekeeping missions from Libya to the Democratic Republic of the Congo. These initiatives improved Libya's standing in Africa and produced noticeable results. Gaddafi had the means to buy influence in Africa thanks to Libya's abundant oil reserves. The decision of African countries not to sanction Libya was influenced by these warming relations, as well as a general dislike of the dominant global order that many African countries shared. Libya's economy was destroyed by UN sanctions despite Africa's support. This prompted Gaddafi to turn over 2 Lockerbie bombing suspects for trial in April 1999, which led to the UN lifting its sanctions and ending Libya's period of isolation. Gaddafi calls for the establishment of an African Union. Gaddafi spoke at the Organization of African Unity's yearly summit in Algiers in July 1999. He proclaimed that it was time for Africa to unite and that the 1963 OAU Charter needed to be reviewed and changed. He invited the heads of African nations to a summit he would host in Sirte, Libya, to achieve this goal. Gaddafi presented his idea for a United States of Africa, with no borders on September 9, 1999, at the summit in Sirte. He envisioned that the continent would be ruled by one government under a single president, and that it would have a united defense force and one foreign and trade policy. To realize this, he called for the establishment of an African Union. Gaddafi established the framework for the Organization of African Unity's transformation into the African Union at Sirte. He pledged to create new bodies for the African Union, such as a Pan-African Parliament, a Peace and Security Council, and an Economic, Social, and Cultural Council. African leaders praised Gaddafi's initiative in 2001, calling him the Son of Africa, and thanking him for his contributions and efforts. They expressed their continued faith in his determined efforts aimed at achieving Africa's collective vision for unity, cooperation, development, peace, and security on the continent. Gaddafi loses influence. The African Union was established in 2002 in South Africa, fulfilling Gaddafi's dream. Gaddafi contributed millions of dollars in Libyan oil revenue to the AU's operating budget in order to realize his vision of a united Africa. To gain support for the idea of a United States of Africa, Gaddafi also paid the AU share of a number of less developed African nations. But despite his generosity, Gaddafi's influence in the AU and backing for his goals started to wane not long after the group was established. While Gaddafi's efforts to rekindle African cooperation were widely praised, his plans for the United States of Africa did not receive the strong backing they required from African leaders, who frequently expressed support for his goals but did not make a commitment to seeing them through. Gaddafi persisted in his dream of a united Africa. He even appeared to become more erratic in his lofty visions as the years went by. For instance, in 2008, in front of 200 traditional African kings, he proclaimed himself King of Kings of Africa. Gaddafi received recognition for his contributions to the African Union in 2009, when he was chosen to lead the group. Throughout his chairmanship, Gaddafi and other African leaders engaged in frequent arguments, and he was unable to secure enough support for a second term. The African Union pushed for an inclusive transition that saw Gaddafi resign peacefully during the Libyan Revolution. This plan was not widely supported internationally. In the end, NATO decided on a military intervention, which resulted in the Libyan leader's death. Gaddafi was a threat to Western powers, which waited for the slightest opportunity to take him out. He had a vision for Libya and Africa, although he wasn't a perfect man. He built rivers in Libya so that all his people could have access to water. Basic amenities were almost free in Libya. The country has not been stable since the people were manipulated by Western forces to end his rule. It is time for Africans to be wise and careful that they are not influenced by other countries to take out good leaders who want to work for their interests. Gaddafi wasn't a perfect leader, but he had good plans for Libya and Africa that would have been at the expense of the West. This explains why they wanted him to go, by all means. Let us know what you think of Muammar Gaddafi in the comments below. What do you think Africa's leaders of today have learned from him? Thank you for watching, and we'll see you in our next video, which shows you what African leaders have learned from Gaddafi.